Yeah, let me talk more about that. Good morning. I'm Susan Stevens Chambers. I'm serving as worship leader this morning alongside our guest speakers, Ryan Sturgis with Jameel Haq, who will be sharing a documentary with us this morning. Our minister, the Reverend Diana McLean, will be with us next on March 3rd. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Mankato, all of you. Whether you are joining us in person or by Zoom, are welcome in this time that we make sacred together. And we extend an especially warm welcome to you if this is your first time here. We know and appreciate that it can be difficult to cross the threshold of a new church for the first time, whether in person or online. We humbly acknowledge that before European colonization, the Dakota people were stewards of the land on which our fellowship building sits. They teach us that the land does not belong to any of us, though it holds the history of our conflicts and our attempts at reconciliation. And we commit to an ongoing and intentional journey of humble connection with Indigenous peoples, characterized by understanding our shared history, accepting responsibility for restoration, and building relationship in the here and now. Thus, we seek to be good relatives. Every Sunday morning is a team effort, and I'm grateful to all who have been willing to serve. Director of Children's Faith Development, Macy Forsyth, will be sharing a story with us in worship, and Children's Chapel will be led by Macy and Lee Gansky. Nursery care is provided by nursery staff members Alexander Sinsawa and Lyndon Anthony. Thanks to our sound assistant, Joe Ritteman, and worship tech, Kat Clements. And thanks to Diane, I think, who might be taking care of hearing assistance this morning. And thanks to those who will be collecting the offering later today, Diane Langliston and Henry Panovich. If you are new to the fellowship, we are grateful that you are expanding the we who is us. If you are attending by Zoom today, you're welcome to stay after the service to visit together. For those attending in person, we have coffee and refreshments, and our discussion from this morning's service will continue down in the fellowship hall. And thanks to those who are providing the hospitality, Sue Wilchin, Rue Gempton, Jim and Connie Rovney. I think I got them all. We're always in need of more people to take turns in those roles that make Sunday mornings possible. We're especially in need of more people to take turns assisting Kat with sound during the worship. But there are many other opportunities as well. There's a clipboard in the hutch in the entryway where you can sign up for one or more ways to serve, and you can still use our Sign Up Genius through our website. We have a few announcements this morning, and the first is from the Committee on Shared Ministry. We are reviewing our Child Faith Development Program at the UUFM. We've received 15 responses as of Wednesday, February 20th. Some of you have had children in the program in the past, and all of us have an interest in this program as it affects the life of our congregation. If you can reply to the survey in the next week, we will summarize the responses and report them out to the congregation in March. The link is on our website. They go on to say, we will also host table talk conversations at coffee hour today. Small group conversations can surface issues and ideas that do not occur when pondering alone. We hope many of you will join us at these tables. And that is the announcements today. Together, let us kindle a flame symbolizing our co-creation of sacred space at home and in this place, made sacred by years of love. As you do, if you're on Zoom, please write in the chat that a chalice is lit on your street. And please say the words with me, which are on your pew cards. We are a welcoming people. And build community. May this flame we kindle today and every day to love beyond belief. We are very pleased today to have Ryan Sturgis along with Jamil Haq here to talk about a documentary that specifically touches Mankato and Martin Luther King's visit here. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves and talk about that film before we show it. So please welcome them.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. We're so delighted to be here and share our film project with you. My name is Ryan Sturgis. I'm the director, writer, and producer of today's film. Today's film is part 2 of a film series that Jamil and I started working on a couple of years ago. It began with the process of taking an audio recording that was preserved all the way back from 1961 when Martin Luther King Jr., the doctor, Reverend, came to Mankato, Minnesota on November 12th of 1961 and did a couple of sermons here in our community. He called it the Sermon for a New Age, and he had 3 key messages that he wanted to leave our community with. And the first was that we all live in a global community. The second was that white supremacy is a very dangerous thing that we all need to pay very close attention to. And the final message was that we all have an obligation and a right to engage in creative protest. These were the 3 things that Martin Luther King Jr. came to Mankato to discuss with our community. It was a great honor, obviously, to have him here in 1961, and that recording that of the speech that he gave at the the Mankato High School was preserved by the Mankato Minnesota State University Mankato's radio station. It was preserved for years, and then the library got a hold of it. And then Jamil approached me as the director of the Kessel Peace Institute to start this project. And I'll let him discuss a little bit why we went in this direction when he comes up. But I just would like to share with you what an honor it was to take on a project like this. The impetus behind this was to try and recreate what that time here was like in a historical context for the first part of the film. We did a bunch of incredible interviews with remarkable people who were very helpful in setting the context of Martin Luther King's message, what it meant back then, and then the evolution. As a documentarian, the most important thing as a filmmaker to do is be in discovery mode. So obviously there was a great deal to learn about Martin Luther King through this process, which was surprising. You think you know about such a remarkable figure, but throughout the process, myself and my partner Michael and our team, our filmmaking team, learned so much just about him and his life and his legacy. But we also learned a lot about our community and what it was like 50 years ago and where we're at today with equity and equality and giving ourselves to equity and where the mandate that Martin Luther King presented to us is at, 50 years ago, where we're at with it today. And the process of filmmaking, again, is a discovery process. So in that process for us, we learned so much about our history, and we learned so much about where our process for equity is in our modern time, and it is a remarkable place that we live here in Mankato. So many people willing to do such great work towards equity and inclusion on so many fronts. And the film that was historical, with this historical narrative for Martin Luther King's speech, the theme ended up arising that because he came here, we had a mandate to carry his message forward. And the thing we discovered is that requires quite a bit of work. That there are people here in this community that are willing to do that work, but there's a lot of work to do. So that led to the second film. And the second film is called MLK 11/12/61. That's the date he arrived. And the subtitle is called The Work. We get really deep into the work that's required for equity here in our community, both locally here in Mankato area, in Minnesota, and of course nationwide as well. And so the film we'll watch today is about what those areas of need that we need to continue to focus on for bringing equity. And we have been so fortunate to have incredible minds behind this. The people who have participated in this film, I can't thank them enough for all of the contributions that they've brought, all of the research and factual information that they've been able to allow us to tell this story through. We hope that you find that to be compelling. And of course, you know, as you make a film, you want it to be emotionally engaging, informative, and you hope that always it brings people to that feeling of wanting to take action and do something on their own to contribute to, you know, what the film is asking of its audience. And we hope that it does that for you. Just to give you a little bit of context to why we're making this film series in our community, and where the university and the Kessel Peace Institute comes into the story, I'd like to invite Dr. Jamil Huck, who just won the Pathfinder Award here this year, up to talk about it.
I was just waiting for the applause. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Unitarians, for having us here today. We really appreciate the opportunity to show our movie and to be here and meet with such wonderful people. As Ryan said, my name is Jamil Huck. I'm a professor of history at MSU, and I'm also the director of the Kessel Peace Institute. I want to also give an additional acknowledgement to KMSU, the radio station at MSU, for preserving that speech. There are no existing pictures from that day that we could find. There are no other recordings or anything else. So the only one who had the foresight to do that was KMSU. The reason that I decided to start making movies was actually COVID, and I want to acknowledge how difficult COVID was for everybody. And one of the possible positive things that COVID brought was the ability to start rethinking what we could do as far as social justice activism. Instead of I took over Kessel in January of 2020, so I had a month to relax, 2 months to relax, and then I had to figure out what to do. And the idea of making movies specifically targeted at high school level students for use in the classroom, and then of course for use in the wider community, was what I settled on. And like I said at the Pathfinder Award, I'm not the smartest person, I'm not the best looking person, but I have an ability to know the right people. So I knew Ryan, and Ryan did all the work. I basically just was like, Ryan, let's just make this movie, and he just went and did it. So obviously, being a little flippant, we've had to find a lot of people for the first movie. We had to work our networks, and I think that's really important. And I see a lot of really good social justice activists here today, a lot of really important people in the Mankato community, and I know that they already know this, but I'm just acknowledging their hard work and the strength of the people that have done significant work in this community well before I got here. I appreciate you all. What we decided after we made this movie was that we had I think it was about maybe 9 hours of additional interviews after we made the first movie. And it seemed a waste just to let those sit in the archives. So I talked to Ryan about it, and we started making another movie. And then I said, okay, why don't we interview the provost? Why don't we interview these other people? And he had to basically make another brand new movie. So extra acknowledgement to Ryan again. Before we actually watch the movie, I just wanted to say something that I said at the Pathfinder Awards about when Dr. King was here. And when Dr. King was here, as Ryan said, he gave a speech called The Challenge of a New Age at Mankato West. But he also gave 2 sermons at Centenary Methodist Church. And both of those sermons were the same. They were the Good Neighbor sermon. The Good Neighbor sermon is about the story of the Good Samaritan. The story about an individual who is not supposed to be righteous, an individual who is not supposed to do the right thing, but a person who is unable to ignore the suffering around them. So what I would like you to hear in that story, and then the fact that Dr. King came to Mankato and gave that speech, is that we're currently living in the midst of an awful, awful humanitarian crisis. And that's a humanitarian crisis in Palestine, particularly in Gaza. And I think if Dr. King were here today, if he were to give that Good Samaritan, the Good Neighbor speech today, he'd really want us to reflect on how our involvement as U.S. taxpayers allows the situation to continue, and what are the positive things that we can do about that in the future. Now, on that note, I think it's time to watch a movie.
I think you'll find a lot of people who were quite surprised that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came here in the 60s.
I have certainly spent some rewarding moments here in Mankato.
Dr. King was in Mankato?
It's November of 1961, and Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech right here on the stage.
It's actually really important to look back at why he came, what was happening then, what he said, what kind of message he left, and think about how that can be applied now.
He was here, right? And now look at what's going on, even in Mankato. What would happen if he were to be here now? The need for him to come then is still with us. The mandate I get from him being here is that we are duty bound as Mankatoans to play our part. We must do something.
When we see the numerous instances of police brutality, when we see the inequities in housing, and we see the inequities and unemployment rates, when we see incarceration rates, when we see those various disparities in statistics and data, there's still a lot of work to do.
I do believe that's part of our responsibility, not only here in Mankato, right, greater Mankato, but across this country. When a community has operated as it has for how many ever years, not having to think about race, and then all of a sudden you're at this moment where you do, and you have to change systems and structures. That's difficult, disruptive work. And what I found is that there's a critical mass of folks here who are willing to do that difficult and disruptive work.
And I think that there's enough people here that are interested in doing the work and that are already doing the work that it's not going to be an easy lift, but there are some people that are ready to do that lifting and are already trying to do some of that.
I choose to stay in Mankato, and part of that is I truly feel like we have folks who are willing to sort of grow and learn.
You see various schools and various institutions actually trying to figure out ways to make change, trying to figure out ways to articulate and focus on social justice.
I think it's important to think about his work and think about what sort of community, what sort of city Mankato really wants to be, and what things need to change in order to create that, because it certainly could happen here.
But we have much work to do.
If we think about the national discourse around race, the diversity, inclusion, much of which actually started while President Obama was in office. While there was a really wonderful opportunity to see a black man as president, it immediately brought about this hatred that was maybe always there. It was always there, but not as overtly where people were talking about it, right? After him, obviously we know that we had Donald Trump in office, and I would argue that conversations around race and hate became much more prominent and boisterous and out in the open. And I think it gave people some comfort in being able to talk about how they felt. A lot of that was just driven from fear, right? So there's individuals who felt like, let's put these people back in their place. Let's reclaim our greatness. But more importantly, all of the really intentional ways that race was used and that racism developed in our country are still in place. So there was really intentional legislation, so intentional that we had to create legislation to undo it in many ways, right? There were really intentional practices that said who could purchase a home, who could learn to write, who could move about the country, right? Who could ride a bus and who could not. Those things were all based on race. And so now we are left with the vestiges of all of those practices, and they don't just go away.
I mean, if you look back to the 60s, I mean, it was just very overt. It was in your face. You know, we don't like black people here, white people here. Very separate. It was, you knew what the rules were, and you dare not break those rules, or there would be very violent consequences. You know, public beatings, sicking on of dogs, water hosing you, and hangings and lynchings. There's been a lot of progress, but I mean, if you think about in the last 5 or 6 years, we've just seen this major regression in a lot of our civil liberties and rights that were fought for, that they're being repealed. I mean, as we speak, I mean, last week we saw 2 progressive statesmen who were kicked out of their seats for protesting. I mean, these are the things that Lewis and King and Maynard Jackson and Jesse Jackson, these are things that they use as tactics in their fight and pursuit of civil rights and equality. And these people were voted out of office for utilizing the tactics that they saw their mentors and their forebears utilize. You see an attack on women and their rights. You look at these gerrymandered districts in Tennessee when you have a majority of the state leans one way politically, but the composition, they have a supermajority right-leaning state legislature because of the way that they have constructed the districts by gerrymandering, constructing these boundaries that have no rhyme or reason. But it's all to dilute the vote and to really control and to maintain power. So I think that's where you have to start looking modern day now, is the economics of it. So lending and borrowing power. I think you're looking at access to quality education. And I think you're also looking at representation in local, state, and federal government. So I'm not sure where we've made a lot of progress since King.
And even when we start to address some of the issues, if we don't actually reckon with how we got that way, we're not changing the structure that upheld the racism. We're just saying, okay, we know we need to do better or we need to do different, and so going forward, we're going to offer these scholarships, or we're going to create these programs, or we're going to put money into this community. But that doesn't change how we got there, which means that we're probably not disrupting the things that happen. So they're still continuing to happen. And so I would argue that we really do have to have these conversations about race and really understand the history of it in order to undo it, to move forward in a more helpful way. What has now been known or coined as the racial reckoning after the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, there were a lot of people that seemed surprised about Minnesota in terms of racial equity. But people of color that live in Minnesota, and particularly Black folks, understand that this is not anything new. Unfortunately, George Floyd's murder brought the national spotlight right to Minnesota, and particularly Minneapolis. This is just a sample of some of the data that we have that talks about the disparities that are very real, very current, and that we are really trying to address in terms of making sure that we have equitable outcomes for all Minnesotans. And it is something that we need to keep working on. I am starting here on an NPR website called Planet Money, and this is from June of 2020. Some of these stats that I mentioned came from 2019, 2020, 2018. I can tell you that in 2023, there's been very little movement in any of them, and some of them have slipped backwards. So let's take a look at some of the highlights of this particular article. It starts out talking about income, and this seems glaring to me. The median Black family in the Twin Cities area earns approximately $38,178 a year. And that is less than half of the median white family income of $84,459. So already, think about how that affects a family. Where you can live, how you can pay your bills, certainly how you eat, your medical care, all of those sorts of things are highly impacted by our income. And so this disparity, there's a lot of reasons that it's there. It is not new, and actually it's worsened a bit in the last few years. It actually has gone back to levels of the 60s and 70s. So that's a problem. And actually the only state that is worse or has a larger gap is Wisconsin. So the other thing I think people find surprising is that this is not the South that we're talking about. We're talking about the upper Midwest, northern states, where people actually left the South to come to these parts of the country looking for a better life, running into some of the same problems that they ran into in the South. So we still have these persistent gaps. So that's one, income inequality. Before the pandemic, the Black unemployment rate in Minnesota was at a historic low, as it says in this article. It was still double the rate of white unemployment. And in 2016, it was more than 3 times the rate of white unemployment. So again, the connection between income, the gaps around healthcare and housing. And in the most recent census data, the Black poverty rate in the Twin Cities area was a little over 25%, 4 times that of the white poverty rate of 5.9 or about 6%. Those are dismal numbers. That is nothing that we can be proud of at all. For all the great things about the state of Minnesota, we have to realize the reality for people in the state, just like in the country, right? Depending on who you are, your outcomes can be very different. And that's not because of individuals and the choices they make. That's really because of racism, systemic racism, things that are in our system.
The work is about bringing about the equity and leveling the playing field, because we have hundreds of years of all of these systematic things that have caused a race of people to not be able to have accumulated the generational wealth. And in this country, wealth early on came by 2 sources, and that was your ability to own land and your ability to own a home. And so you had these systematic things that prevented Black people from owning land and owning a home. And how did most people become wealthy? They passed the land down from generation to generation to generation. Then you're starting a whole race of people from a disadvantage, and we've never been able to catch up.
So one of the greatest indicators of income is home ownership. It's how you pass down wealth to generations. It is how you pay less in taxes, right? It's how you create a better lifestyle because of perhaps where you can live. About 3/4 of white families in the Twin Cities own homes. About 1/4 of Black families do. And that has a lot to do with racial covenants. There's a project called Mapping Prejudice, and they are working in the Mankato area now. But they took a look at some of the racial covenants that were in deeds of homes, which exclusively talked about who could and couldn't buy or purchase a home. One of the things that they found is that 100% of the time it said that at that time the word was Negroes would not purchase in this area. So if there was a racial covenant, it might list a whole host of different things, but what was consistent 100% of the time was that information about Negroes not being able to purchase these certain homes or in these certain areas. Along with that was the changes in St. Paul and the Rondo corridor where they put in 94. The mayor of St. Paul is now addressing that, providing money for descendants of that area. But they ripped out a bunch of homes that were owned by black folks, a thriving black community. And many of those people did not obviously get the fair market rate for their homes. They were displaced, and many of them never recovered. Similar thing happened in South Minneapolis when 35W went through. Growing, thriving black community. They lost their homes and they were not able to recover. Again, those were intentional choices, thinking about which neighborhoods they could go in and do this. They could have certainly picked somewhere else, but they didn't.
I think it's a little bit more sophisticated now. But I think, when you look at lending practices and borrowing standards and how it changes based upon your color, we still have these systematic ways of how we do credit scores and how we approve people for loans. And it's different.
And then finally, let's take a look at education. Part of our challenge in education is the number of teachers and educators of color. So our state population is about 13% African American. In our teacher ranks, it's about 3%. And what we know is that black teachers of color, are very impactful, really for all students, but particularly for black students. We see that one black teacher, their achievement increases marketably. I believe the statistic is around 50%. And then it just rises if they have more than one black teacher through their tenure. I know many students that didn't have any teachers of color at all until they maybe got to college. A lot of the work that I do around the state, I can talk to people who say they didn't encounter anyone of color in terms of a teacher or an education leader at all through their career. Just didn't happen. And so that's a real issue too. One of them being just representation and seeing yourself. And the other one, of course, sort of a cultural piece about how to relate to, understand, and work with students of color. Black students are treated in a certain way and they're not able to reach their full potential in the space where they're actually supposed to be doing that, right? They're supposed to be learning and growing and experiencing things, making friendships with people, being able to be their fullest selves. And if they're not able to do that because they're told they have to act a certain way or fall in line, or they're always under threat of getting suspended or put in special classes, then people eventually start to turn inward and they're not going to perform in the way that they can. It just is not healthy for anyone, and it is so harmful for our society as a whole. The state of Minnesota does consistently have one of the nation's worst education achievement gaps between blacks and whites. And according to this article, in 2019, it did rank 50th when it came to racial disparities in high school graduation rates. If our students aren't graduating, or they're not graduating on time, or they're not fully prepared to pursue post-high school education or other career opportunities, they are less able to get the jobs that pay a livable wage, and certainly not anything that will help them to thrive. They're not able to purchase homes. So all of those things sort of cascade together. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. It's not about individual choices. People are doing the best that they can. It is about a system that is really stacked against them.
One myth of the civil rights movement is that Martin Luther King Jr. is the guy, is the leader of everything, is the brainchild of everything, is the sole driver of everything, is this godlike figure that does no wrong. And if you have that vision in your head, if you have that myth in your head, then it seems like any further civil rights type movement is impossible, because nobody else like that is ever going to come along. When in fact, he's not any of those things.
there were a number of important people in the civil rights movement. Barnyard Rustin, of course, Malcolm X, a lot of influential women.
If you look at the Montgomery bus boycott, he becomes famous for it, and he gets a lot of the media attention, but that work was done by hundreds and hundreds of people in Montgomery, and a lot of them are women.
He listened to the voices of people who public society were not going to listen to, and namely black women. So Rosa Parks, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, like those women were pushing King, and he was listening.
You know, his approach of involving many different people was really important too, because there's no one person that can solve the things that we need to solve. Just like, although he's held up as a hero, and he certainly was, he had a lot of people that he was working with, right? Many, many, many unsung heroes. Many black women that were involved in the struggle and really supported him that we're just starting to find information out about, and probably many that we never will, that just won't be celebrated.
A lot of the work for the Montgomery bus boycott is done by women. And if you look at like a lot of the social justice movements happening today, if you look at the demographics of a Black Lives Matter protest, what you're going to see is it's a lot of women. Martin Luther King Jr. recognized the power of students. It takes people like Ella Baker and Diane Nash to convince Martin Luther King Jr. that students can play a really important role in the movement. They can become the vanguard of the movement. They can engage in creative protest.
People were willing to get beat up. There were people who were willing to sit at counters. There were who no longer want to sit. He was the face of it, but there was the thousands and thousands of people, young people in a lot of cases, but also older people, who said, no, I'm not going to sit in the back of the bus anymore. I'm going to go to the school. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And we still need those people. We still need those people who are going to stand online for 10 hours without water to vote. We still need those people.
And not people that are in this work not everybody feels like they have to be a leader or be celebrated, and that's okay.
So everybody doesn't have to lead. Some people just have to be part of the group that is moving forward.
And people have to realize that they're not powerless. We make safe decisions sometimes. We feel like someone else is going to fix it, or it's just not my job. And I'll be honest, I believe in Minnesota, where we do have a lot of liberal people, we do have people that are interested, they are concerned. What stops them often is they are concerned about what's going to be the impact on them personally. And so we have to sort of step away from that fear. And in a real tangible way, if you're working in an organization, if you own an organization, or you're in a power position of an organization, you have to be willing to risk your livelihood to do what is right. And that's not just white people, that is everyone. But that is a risk that you have to be willing to take. That's a tough pill to swallow. But how else will we ever change anything? We cannot continue a status quo and expect anything to change. Really, saying that we aren't aware is not okay anymore. You know, honestly, I think the first thing that people have to do is just care. And it's not really enough to just notice it and maybe feel sorry or feel bad. Let that sort of push you to actually taking some action. And so one of the things that we talk about is really disrupting things that are happening around you. So if you know that someone is getting different treatment, right, because of their cultural difference, or if you even suspect it, it's okay to speak up about that. It's okay to say, I think that you are treating that person differently because of who they appear to be. Or allowing yourself to question your own biases and pay attention to those, how those things make you feel and why you believe the things that you do. There's a lot of books, there's a lot of learning that we can do on our own in order to sort of advance our understanding, to understand cultural differences, to think about how we can sort of show up differently in spaces.
I think we have to demand it if we want to get down to the local granular level. In Mankato, I think that the leadership of the community, I think that they are grappling with it right now. They're trying to figure out, how do we create an environment, the greater Mankato region, how do we create an environment where more Davids see this as an attractive place to come and to live and to work and to play and to build a life and to build a family. And so I think they have to continue to grapple with that. What does it look like? And then how do they put in measurable targets that really challenges the industry here to put their money where their mouth is? And so how do you go out and recruit top talent that looks different from you and recruit them to the area? I think it's great for the region to have these goals, but at some point you have to do the work to actually show that you're making progress towards this equity mindedness that you are aspiring to. And so I think that's the next layer of work that needs to occur. And I think that there's interest here.
One of the things we can do is understand this in a holistic way. Supporting white supremacy is not necessarily all overt acts of racism or hatred and all that. It's literally a part of our central nervous systems. Our nervous systems literally get triggered when people feel threatened in any kind of way. So I think the thing that we can do is to understand that structures have to be thought of in ways that allow for some somatics, right? And so for those of us who are in the arts, we kind of understand this on one level, but I'm saying on another level, we gotta use it in ways that deepens towards our collective healing. Not just strategizing about making policies and all that, that's fine, but like strategies are no match for culture. And there's a whole lot of literature on that. Like who we are, what we believe in, is ultimately going to win out over any strategy we come up with. Well, let's just try, let's do this differently. Let's change the policy for how we hire, or let's change our admission policy. But if the culture still is that, even in doing those things, that if the culture still is set so that even though we're doing those, we want to make sure that in terms of who controls this institution, it's going to be somebody white, then all those strategies are not going to still overturn it completely. That's what Audre Lorde, black feminist, when she said you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And that was her way of saying what I'm saying. But I think one thing you can do, though, if we did this somatically, it allows white folks to deal with whatever their historical triggers are, so that they can understand and then be able to, what some trauma therapists talk about, which is like this process of harmonizing with other human beings in ways that allows us to go beyond sort of these like superficial understandings of systems and structures to more of an internalized, like somatic understanding, so that we can see each other in humanity in such ways where we'll go, oh, there's no way I would let another human being suffer worse than me. Because that's the somatic piece. Then that influences the system and the structures and the policies differently when you have that approach.
Racism doesn't just hurt those that are at the receiving end of it. It actually hurts everyone. Racism is physiologically, emotionally, it is degrading to our health and well-being. I mean, literally, for some it kills. But the person who is enacting the racism, it is harmful to them as well. And the healing that needs to come, there is healing for everyone. Now, part of that is having conversations and actually being able to talk about these issues, right? Because there's so many people who immediately don't want to even talk about it. It's scary, it feels harmful, there's a lot of fear. That's okay, we still have to talk about it. But then what do we do beyond talking? How do we say, well, this is what we mean by an equitable society? And that is something that we'll have to come up with together. Everyone has to be involved in making those changes and creating something new that we've never experienced. So we don't quite know what that will look like. That's okay. To be sure, we have seen, in general, we've seen some advances, right? We're not where we were 20, 50, certainly 100 years ago and beyond. We've seen some things change as a society and for individuals. It's not enough, though, because we still have too many people that are just barely surviving, and we need to be able to have everyone thriving.
I think the next few years, when I say next, it could be 10 years, it's going to be tough. Because, it's going to be the bastions of crazy ideas.
Although it may be uncomfortable for a lot of us who are more traditional and we think that there's a natural order to things, I think the times that we're in right now calls for a little chaos. This Gen Z group, I think they are more akin to the Kings, the John Lewises. So I think they are grassroots. I think they are building it from the ground up. They don't have a lot, but they are passionate about their causes. And I think that we may see a shift back, and this Gen Z group may be the catalyst to really more closely realize King's real dream.
Although there's a lot of work for white folks to do, we have to inform that work, because whoever's being most affected has to help craft the solutions, right? Frankly, they should be leading those solutions because they know what most needs to be done. And so coming together and deciding how they can best move forward and supporting one another is hugely important.
My encouragement to all of us who are doing this work is to support each other, to be there, right? In whatever way you might be able to be there for one another, to be there, right? Because through that, we gain reassurance we are not alone.
The healing that happens in the white community is different than the healing that's happening in the black community, than it's happening in the Latino community. It's all different for everyone because the way that the issues impact people are different, right? So there's no one solution for everyone, which is why we need so many voices involved in coming up with the best solutions for the problems that we're facing right now.
I don't think that normal processes and the natural order of things is going to give the system the shot that it needs. And so I would encourage the Gen Zs to remain committed to your cause and to fight like hell to ensure that progress is made and that we don't regress back to the great America that we were.
Given our time, we will continue the discussion downstairs. They've been invited to come down for coffee, so we would like to have them join us and talk more about this. As we extinguish our sanctuary chalice, please extinguish your chalice at home and say these words with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.